Okay, I'm gonna go ahead and get started. It looks like we're getting everyone trickling in. Aloha everyone, mahalo for attending our second of 5 Rainbow Town Hall panels. My name is Randy Soriano and I'm a board member at the Hawaii LGBT Legacy Foundation, which is a nonprofit organization that proudly brings you Honolulu Pride every year. For those of you who are new to our forum, the Rainbow Town Hall panel series is a project that was led by a team of passionate volunteers, including myself and fellow board member Andrew Ogata. Our goal is to start an open conversation that brings us to focus to topics that affect our LGBTQIA community. We're immensely grateful to have leaders, advocates, and community members serve as panelists who are able to articulate their expertise and personal experiences on these issues and hopefully spark a community awareness that will bring positive change for the future. First, some quick housekeeping. Our program today will end around 6 p.m. and there will be a Q&A session during the last 10 minutes. Feel free to add your questions to the Q&A box and our moderator will get to as many questions as possible at the end of our panel. Also, we're live streaming on Honolulu Pride's Facebook page, so please feel free to encourage your friends and family to tune in as well. Before we start, let me remind everyone that it is still Honolulu Pride Month, and we're so excited to announce that we've launched an online store so you can get all of the Pride swag that you need from the safety of your home. Please visit honolulupride.com/shop to check out our merchandise selection. Without further ado, I want to introduce our moderator for this evening, Thaddeus Pham. Thaddeus is currently the Viral Hepatitis Prevention Coordinator for the State of Hawaii Department of Health in the Harm Reduction Services branch. He is also the co-founder and co-director of the Hep Free Hawaii Coalition, a community-based program focused on increasing awareness and access to hepatitis services in Hawaii. In 2018, he was recognized by the National Minority Equality Forum as a 40 under 40 leader in minority health. He is currently a Bloomberg Fellow at Johns Hopkins School of Public Health. He approaches public health from a social justice perspective and seeks to leverage community partnerships and systems level policy changes to address health disparities regardless of disease state. I would like to give a round of applause to our moderator, Thaddeus Pham.
Great, thanks so much, Randy, and thanks for the opportunity to speak with and learn from all these great panelists today. So I'm just gonna get right into it. Happy Honolulu Pride, everyone. And I'm gonna just call each of the panelists by name and just ask that you introduce yourself and give a little bit of context in terms of who you are. And then we'll get started in our discussion today. So first, Alison, would you go ahead?
Sure, I'm Alison Lazzara. I am a teacher at Punahou School. I teach Academy English Learning Support. And for the past decade or so, I've been the advisor for our LGBTQ group, SAGA, Sexuality and Gender Acceptance. Thank you.
Great, thanks, Alison. And Lord Ryan?
Yeah, hello, everybody. My name is Lord Ryan Lizardo. He, him, his are my pronouns. I am the program manager of work-based learning at the Chamber of Commerce, and I just started there a month ago. So I am transitioning from being a educator for the past 6 years. So I taught at James Campbell High School, primarily sociology and psychology there. And I also served as a Rainbow Sabres advisor, both back then and also now as a community advisor. So that's been an interesting transition, but very happy to be here and excited to talk with all of you today.
Great, thanks, Lord Ryan. And Ryan.
Hi, everyone. My name is Ryan Mandado, he, him. I am the Chief Academic Officer of DreamHouse Ewa Beach Public Charter School. We are Hawaii's newest public charter school focused on leadership and identity development. And actually, Lord Ryan and I are part of an organization called PRISM that brings together LGBT educators to discuss about what can we do to advocate for teachers as well as students. So nice to be on here.
Great, thanks, Ryan. And Kim Coco.
Hi, Thaddeus, and thank you so much, Randy, and the rest of the panelists for letting me join you. In 2004, I was a foster parent to young trans and bi, gay, along the spectrum teenagers, and they were in the public school system and they were experiencing bullying. So it was doing advocacy for them. And this is way back in like 2004. And then I decided to run to be on the Board of Education to change the way the Department of Education addressed bullying from the inside. And then in 2006, I was elected to the Board of Education and then re-elected in 2010 as an openly trans advocate for students. And so in that role, I've always, and many of you already know that the Board of Education does have a youth member on the board, and they've had that position for quite some time, because it's always been very important to make sure that young people, students in particular, have a voice at the table. So in light of that, in planning, in coordinating this Zoom panel, the panelists and the facilitators and the coordinators realized that we're missing a youth voice. So normally these panels have 4 people. So it is my honor to step down and create space for young person, Morgan, who's gonna be introducing herself. So Morgan, thank you. I look forward to listening to all of you from the sidelines, and I'll be sending in my questions via chat. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm Morgan. I'm a junior at Punahou School, and I'm one of 2 co-presidents of our Sexuality and Gender Acceptance Club. And I'm like really excited to be here. So yeah, thanks again.
Great, thanks Morgan, and thanks Kim for demonstrating what it's like to provide space for people and provide opportunities to share from the people who are most affected. So I'm so excited to meet all of you. I've actually met most of you just for the first time 10 minutes ago, so we're going to get started. So we're going to start with a question and on a prompt, and I think something that came up is, what do we want folks who are attending, who are listening, to get out of this discussion today? So I don't know if anyone wants to start first, or I can just pick along what I see here. So what do you folks want other folks to get out of this today?
Thank you, Thaddeus. I think I want this really to be a conversation when we have educators as well as students at the table to discuss our experiences of working in schools, but also to figure out what we need, right? What does our community need? What do students need in the school system so that they feel supported?
Great, thanks, Ryan. And I know you used to work with Lord Ryan, so I don't know if, Lord Ryan, do you have similar sentiments in terms of what Ryan was saying?
I think very similar. I think the first word that came to mind for me was dialogue. I think far too often, like these conversations go under the rug towards different things like standards alignment versus like talking about how do we craft our curriculum in this way, when in reality, we should be thinking about the social justice perspective and how to bring different folks from different backgrounds into our curriculum. So my hope is that this conversation will spark some action, but also spark some dialogue with our key players at different schools and folks that are here today who are both in the community and also who are allies to our space.
Great. And Alison and Morgan, do you have anything that you want to add to that? I think you both bring a different perspective as well.
Sure. One of the things that I've noticed having a lot of people come and share their ideas with us is that it's great to have some practical application, and that it's nice, it's important to talk about a subject, but also what are the actual things that we can do tomorrow to make a difference in the classroom and make a difference in our kids' lives. So I think that's kind of, yeah.
That's great. Thanks, Alison. And what do you think, Morgan?
Yeah, I definitely agree. And I guess coming from the perspective of a student who's in the classrooms, I think that a lot can be gained from listening to people who are going through these experiences. And I just like to share some of my experiences and some things that I've noticed as a student.
Great. And that's actually a great jumping off point, Morgan. I mean, so what are some things that you think that we might not know? I mean, we all look fabulous and young on the panel, but none of us except you are actually in school right now as a student. So what would you think that we should know? Like if there was just a few things.
I think that a lot of adults maybe, there are certain, I think that in the classroom specifically. Like there are certain actions and behaviors that occur that maybe adults, even teachers who are very aware of these things might not notice, because I think that language and culture is constantly changing, and there are things that are said today that might not have meant anything even 5 years ago, but now can correlate to being a sort of harassment against members of the LGBTQIA community. I think that's like one thing.
Wow, that's really helpful to know. And are there specific languages or language or things that are said that you would want to call out or point out?
I think that more recently, especially things that go trending on like Instagram and TikTok, being aware of the evolving language that kids use. Like I know that a few months ago, just the word suspect, which is a normal word, was used in a derogatory way against gay people. And it's weird and interesting how the internet can take words and twist them, and then kids in classroom settings, in school settings, will use them, and no one will be like wiser about that, because like there's no way to know.
Wow, I didn't know about that. So thank you for sharing. That's really it's really important, I think, for us as people in the community and as educators to know about. And I'll turn it back to Lord Ryan, or Alison. Hearing this, how do you respond to it, especially having been in the classroom setting?
I think it makes me think that, so I used to do safe space trainings back in college, as well as with my students at Campbell High School, where we would teach teachers to how to make their classrooms more inclusive to their students who might be in the LGBTQ plus community or not, and just how to make space for that. But what that's making me think, what Morgan just said, is that the curriculum always needs to continue to change and evolve for things that are happening now. Like I didn't even think that things like TikTok is now going to be a huge, or could become a huge issue when it comes to LGBTQ plus rights, right? And so like navigating that, and also like bringing up to date when we do things such as safe space trainings, for those of you who don't know, are trainings to make our teachers and classrooms more inclusive for LGBT plus students. Like we need to keep that in mind as we recognize that our students are probably going through a different shifts in ways that they're experiencing different kind of microaggressions when it comes to the LGBTQ plus community.
And if I could just sort of piggyback on that, once we create those safe spaces, that's when the dialogue becomes so important, where we as teachers, as educators, as adults need to be the listeners and listen to Morgan and listen to her classmates and learn from them, because there's no way that we are going to be able to pick up on all the nuances, and they've got to teach us, and we've got to be totally okay with listening. And when we hear those types, I saw that one of the questions was what strategies might work to call these out, these words, is we've got to learn them first. And then once we do that, it's not enough to be like, oh, don't say that, to say, okay, let's have a conversation about why this is hurtful, why this is dangerous to use this kind of language, and to not let it slip by.
One thing that I also wanted to add is that even within our community, there is constant changing of the language, right? So I would say in the past 5 years, from 2015 to now, there's been many movements to reclaim language, in regards to the words that are being used, and changing the meaning for it for a particular community. And so what does the training look like, or within our even own community, to advocate for ourselves in school spaces, or even within the broader community as well?
That's a great point, that the work and the spaces that we create in educational settings also reflect what's happening outside of those educational settings. So thank you for bringing that up. And thanks, Alison, for addressing the question in the chat. So with that in mind, there's a lot of things that you folks have mentioned in terms of creating safe spaces, in terms of training, and in terms of strategies. What are some of like the resources that you found most useful, or even concepts in terms of creating a more safe educational setting? And I'll start with Morgan as our Youth Voice, our featured panelist for tonight. So go ahead, Morgan.
As far as spaces go, obviously the one big one on Punahou's campus is SAGA. And it's honestly been a bit of, we have some struggles with getting people to join sometimes. I think that's one of the main things, because inside of the classroom, we're very strict on like being nice to one another and being understanding. And of course, asking questions is completely okay, but sometimes if a line is ever crossed or even skirted upon, it should be shut down if you're trying to create a space where everyone can feel comfortable. And then within that, I think then the next step is like, how do you get students who feel very insecure in their sexualities or gender, and maybe they're trying to find a place to go, but they don't feel comfortable going there yet? How do like we advocate for, hey, you can come, it'll be safe and it'll be good and you'll be supported.
That's great. And it's great to hear that there's a program there. Alison, Lord Ryan, or Ryan, do you have other opportunities or resources that you've heard about, or other similar kind of things in other schools?
Yeah, Thaddeus, I can speak to that. I think one, GSAs save lives, right? And I would say when I became a teacher, Lord Ryan was at Campbell before I was, having a GSA helped me as an educator feel safe. And it was a student club because I felt like I was able to connect somehow, or parts of my identity was able to connect somehow. And they played a huge role in training teachers and other professionals on campus about the experiences that students may be feeling. But one thing that I can say is I also don't want to always place that responsibility on students, that I think the larger, broader issue is the fact that so many public school teachers have zero professional development when it comes to understanding the experiences of LGBTQIA plus students. And I would say in my work as someone who entered public education, I didn't have a single training, if it wasn't for Lord Ryan and his students, in regards to how do I address these particular issues, right? So we need that training. I think many teachers need that training, because also we can't just place it on LGBTQ teachers too, to facilitate those safe spaces. And most of the times in these, in schools, it's usually those individuals who are placed with the responsibility of creating these safe spaces. So how do we make everyone ensure that we provide these inclusive environments for kids?
Totally agree with you. I've had the same experience because I work with learning difference kids as well. And I find that when we run workshops, that we're preaching to the choir, that it's always the people who already believe in what we're doing who are there saying, I want to learn more, I want to learn more. And it really needs to be the entire faculty and staff who participate in these workshops. Regardless, everyone needs to be there. Yeah.
And Thaddeus, I like how you paused. You saw me unmute. This is the Zoom world. That's what we're living in, y'all. I think one of the things that Ryan did say that I'm latching onto, as well as Alison, you actually touched on this too, is like you don't need an LGBTQ plus educator to start like any type of gay straight alliance or SAGA or Rainbow Sabers. Like those are the allies that we need in the work, because sometimes it's very scary for an LGBTQ plus educator like myself to step into a world where I have to put myself on the line in order to make sure that kids like me or who are like me are safe. And sometimes we need those allies in order to bring those conversations to the forefront. So if we feel safe in that environment to begin the work. And I think I was very fortunate. Like I'm a Campbell alumni. I had roots already at Campbell. So it wasn't as scary for me to enter and like create this type of space for someone like Ryan and for the students who I just saw Mara pop into the Q&A. So hey, Mara, so glad you can join us today. But like walk into those spaces and have a safe space. Those doors need to be opened. And I think to some of Maureen, you just asked a fantastic question. Like, how do I do that without feeling patronizing or sounding insincere? I think you even engaging in this today is a conversation starter. It's an opportunity to go and reach out to administration and be like, hey, I think we need one of these clubs and organizations. And although you don't identify in the community, your allyship would mean the world to someone who does, who might be afraid to approach administration.
Yeah, these are all really powerful and great points. And I am watching to see when you folks unmute, so don't worry. I'll try not to step on you. But I think, the theme that I'm hearing is, as much as it's important to create our HUIs of safe spaces, it's also really important to implement systematic change. And so someone sent a question in, and actually they asked you, Morgan, they started by saying, we also need more representation of LGBTQ plus relationships and healthy relationship sex education. And so Morgan, what do you think, where do you think the Hawaii education system needs a change? I know it's a pretty broad question, but if you could tackle that.
In my experience, and I have friends who are also in the public school system, there is little to no education on sex ed, and there's absolutely no education on sexual education for LGBTQ students, or even any learning about the LGBTQ community. And so I think that having a curriculum that at the very least invites that conversation into classrooms would be very helpful, because at the moment I feel as though a lot of educators and students don't get the opportunity to discuss anything within the realm of the LGBTQ community.
Well said. And it's really interesting because I was just talking with Alison about this a little bit yesterday, about certain assumptions that are made in curricula. And I don't know if you would mind kind of speaking to that a little bit, Alison.
Sure. I really believe that it's twofold how things need to change. And one of them is that the way that we teach has to change. So when we say something, and this is an experience where it was a math class and a teacher said, okay, well, what is your mom's name? And the boy answered, I don't have a mom. I have two dads. Or in another case where you're making a Mother's Day gift, especially in, the elementary level. What if you've got two dads? So how do we change and shape our curriculum to normalize the diversity of our students and our families? And I think that's because I think that's one of the main ways that we make a change, is that it's completely normalized. When you have a math problem and it's a word problem and you've got two moms ordering pizza for their kids and you're trying to do fractions, it becomes normal. And so it isn't something that makes a child feel like he or she or they stand out, but are just part of our community. So.
Thanks, Alison. And Ryan, I see you unmuting.
Yeah, I wanted to touch on base in regards to what Morgan said, because I definitely think there is a lack of sexual health education for all schools. A lot of the curriculum is abstinence-based, which with the research shows doesn't really work. But there is no further step to identify how the LGBTQ community has access to sexual health education. And I'm going to share a story, a very vulnerable story, because I think it matters. My second year teaching, I had a student who knew that I was gay, and he said, "Mister, how do gay people have sex?" And I just stood there and I was like, whoa, that's one, and the student also identified as gay. So in that moment, I was like, one, there are no particular resources I can reach out to right now to figure out how to facilitate this conversation. Two, you have to balance between what information is quote unquote objective versus subjective in this conversation related to sexual health. And three, I kind of felt disappointed in myself as a gay teacher not being able to answer this question for gay students, right? And this is so many, I think a lot of gay, LGBT students face this when you have people who do look like them in the classroom, but still those people are not fully equipped to have these conversations. And I even reached out to the health department, how do I address this? And they're like, how do gay people have sex? And I was like, oh my gosh. So it just shows you like kind of, a larger systemic issue on what is missing for our students. And it goes beyond just sexual health, even health education in general. The report that, Thaddeus, in 2017, your department created this amazing report on, how our community is impacted by drugs, and that information is also not provided as well. So I think, one, we have to provide high quality sexual health and health education in general, but also go further down into how does it, disproportionately impact particular communities.
Thank you for sharing that, Ryan. And then Lord Ryan, did you want to add to that? I know that because you transitioned from being as a teacher to doing more, I think, policy level work now in the Chamber of Commerce, you were saying. So I don't know if you can speak to that transition and what that looks like in terms of what we've been discussing.
Yeah, I mean, to be completely honest, I'm still learning my role as I so like I haven't really hit the policy part of it yet, but I think one of the things I did want to touch on that I think both Ryan and Alison said beautifully is like there's things that we can change about the curriculum that need to happen now. And like opening the door to those conversations. I think one of the things that I wanted, like that I just wrote down is this awareness piece. Like in order for us to start having that conversation and dialogue, we need to start early. And I think elementary school is not too early to start having a conversation. And sometimes the most simple things you could do is changing language in your word problems, as Alison said. Like being able to bring in books with different narratives and different what's it called, characters, like LGBTQ plus characters within the book, is like opens the door to normalize, right? The idea of normalizing and not staying in heteronormativity is like a huge part of this. And so I agree with everything that was said. I think it was said beautifully. I do think there needs to be changes at the systemic level for sure and the institutional level. And I hope there are people and policymakers on this call right now. I hope you're here who are listening to this and like really thinking outside the box of what we can do to change education.
Yeah, that's a really important point in terms of what you're bringing up around access, especially for elementary school kids. I know that when we presented some of the data from the health department to local schools, we would always have teachers or even staff come up and say, hey, where can I get like kids' books on what it means to be gay or lesbian or transgender, gender nonconforming? So there's a lot of people out there wanting resources. And it's exciting that we have about 55 people on to hear from you folks today. So to kind of touch on a little bit on the elementary school aspect, there's some questions coming in from people in terms of how to support teachers and families and students who are both younger than high school, so elementary and middle school, but also older, so people who are in grad school or college. So Morgan, I don't know if you want to speak to that in terms of your experience in elementary and middle school, and maybe what you're seeing in the future when you enter, whatever comes after high school.
I think it's really interesting because I had no understanding of sexuality and gender as a kid, and I was never taught anything. So when I realized my own sexuality, it came to a complete shock to me because I didn't know any of these like terms or anything. And it was really interesting because I felt I think that sometimes in order to change as a person, you need to go through a big event. And I think that me realizing my sexuality changed my perspective on the LGBTQ community completely. Because before it wasn't even in my headspace, but then afterwards it was a big chunk of what I thought about. And a lot of kids I started to notice when they used slurs and when they called each other gay and everything. So I think that teaching younger kids that that kind of language isn't okay is better because as they approach high school, it's already in their heads that this is an okay thing to say. And they're already so set in, it's just a joke, it doesn't mean anything, that it's very difficult to teach them how to empathize and undo some of that behavior.
Wow, thanks for sharing that. And thanks for sharing your journey too. I think that's really valuable, how something that starts early can just kind of have ramifications beyond. So our other panelists, our educator panelists, do you folks want to speak to that at all? If not, okay, we have a lot of, no worries, no pressure.
Maddie, could you repeat the question? Sorry, I'm wrapped up in what people are saying in the chat as well.
There's a lot of great in the chat. Yeah, so really just the idea that when we're thinking about education and about the impact on people who are sexual and gender minorities, that it actually starts very early and that it extends across our lives, right? So it's not just one group during high school, but it's early, cultural changes in elementary school, but also things that are maintained through college and grad school. So that idea of just like this continuing progression of support throughout the lives of students and after school. So I don't know if any of you want to speak to that. And yeah, great, robust chat. Thank you everyone in the chat.
Just as a quick little side note, just thinking about how, because I know one of the questions in the chat was like, how early do you start, that type of thing. There was a play that HTY did about a year or so ago called Sparkle. And I think it was directed and written by Anna Cusick, and it's her son's experience and journey, but it was geared toward kindergartners and pre-K. And so I think, and it was a conversation about not dimming your sparkle, not losing your sparkle. And so this, like Morgan said, this conversation needs to start with our children when they're that little, and that we have to support one another in, in the arts and in including all of these different opportunities, because we have great resources here. We just have to take advantage of them.
Thanks, Alison. And I'm going to jump off your point because there's as Lord Ryan said, there's a lot of discussion happening in the chat. And so a lot of folks want to help, but just kind of speak to what you're saying. Some people say that they disagree that elementary is too young for sexual health or to discuss, sexual or gender identity. So what would be ways that you could have conversations with people who think that? I don't know if folks have ideas around that. We can also let it marinate as we move on to, Lord Ryan, go ahead.
I don't know if this answers your question directly. I think one of the things that I'm sitting with so there are two different chats happening, right? I see the Q&A and I see the general chat. But I see, Jamie, you said you have doctors and health educators who are ready and willing to come into classrooms, and please connect with me after this because I want to know who those people are, because part of my role is to make sure those people come into schools. But I think one of the things and directions that some of the people don't know is that schools are ready to welcome community speakers into their classrooms, right? And so there are ways to get these people with the agenda of helping our LGBTQ plus folks from a different pathway, such as health. So if we can get those people into our health classrooms to have a conversation about sexual health, what both heterosexual and LGBTQ plus, that gives us an opportunity to see that there are people in the community who are willing to do this, and hopefully that can permeate through some type of change. I think one of the things that educators really fear is a loss of job security. And when you engage in these conversations, there's a risk there that I think our community partners can really help mediate that risk and start to change those perceptions. So I don't know if that directly answers your question, but my hope is that as schools start to value community members coming in to share their expertise, there's an opportunity there to make community shifts in mindset when it comes to LGBTQ plus and related initiatives.
Thank you, Lord Ryan. Yeah, this theme of discussion and dialogue or trialogue or quadrilogue, multiple voices sharing and just creating these discussions is really important. It seems to be coming up a lot. Something that folks in the chat and in the Q&A asked about are the role of family in shaping these. So if they could have a very supportive teacher, but if they have a home life that is unstable or not supportive, it could be challenging, right? So I don't know if, again, I'll turn it to you first, Morgan, as our youth voice, but do you have any insights into what that might be like and how we can kind of support folks whose family life is maybe less supportive than their educational setting life?
Yeah, I think that just having on-campus support does help a lot. I have a friend who came out to her parents and she was almost kicked out of her house. And it's like one of those things where there's not enough that you can do, but I think that teachers and educators being there for students and supporting them and telling them that it is going to be okay and it will get better and that they are there for them if they ever need to talk does do a lot, because I feel like it's something like very traumatic to go through. And if they feel that they don't have any other support lines, then it can get like really scary and feel very isolating.
Thank you, Morgan. And do any of the other panelists want to respond or add to that?
Yeah, I did that. Yes, I think as a current school leader, we really value, parent partnerships. But the issue that comes up is when is the right time to also educate family members in what does it mean to be inclusive. And so one thing that I tell my teachers all the time is think about what we can control, and that's our environment, our school environment. And I think for young ages, uh, the power of storytelling and representation matters. So, we had this conversation, having multiple books about different stories that exist. And it has to be frequent. It can't just be like, oh, this month we're gonna share this story about, a couple of that are two men, right? Like it needs to be constant. It needs to be it needs to be visible. And we can also control the spaces of even our classroom environment, like putting up a pride flag or a sticker that says this is a safe space. Those are small things that we might not think is, large changes, but those small aspects can really just create that environment that is needed for everyone.
Thanks, Ryan. And a question just came in, which I think is relevant to what we're talking about. So do any of you panelists have suggestions or experiences specifically for people who are LGBTQ plus getting support in especially conservative schools or communities, and how either the student or the educator dealt with that? And I think this also kind of ties in back to what you folks are saying, what you were saying actually earlier, Ryan, about being safe for educators as well, right? Creating safe spaces for educators. So I don't know if anyone would like to speak to that tension between, a safe environment and a not so safe context.
For this question, I do want to say that that's why it's super important for school leaders to really be in support of the LGBTQ plus community. School leaders meaning principals and vice principals, who are the leaders of not just your school, but that community, right? And it's really about facilitating parent conversations and being brave and saying, this is what we value as an institution. Let's have the dialogue. It's going to be a hard conversation, but it needs to happen because teachers as well as students are going to be affected by the decisions made when parents come out against or are strongly against a particular topic or what they deem as controversial. I think there needs to also be more professional development for school leaders to facilitate this conversation, holding community dialogues, open houses about how do you talk about these things. How are teachers first talking about these things with students, and how can you have this conversation with your child at home? Because I think parents also are scared to have these conversations. They also don't know how, right? And so what are we doing to provide that safe environment and provide the tools for not just our students, but for family members as well to facilitate this dialogue with their children?
I think this is also one of those moments where allyship is so important as well, because they have this, in some ways are less vulnerable, and so they they can speak out on behalf of the community and put themselves out there in a way that says these are the people who we need to support and we need to care for. Um, but it's rough. I taught at a Catholic school here, and I never really changed my agenda, and I would talk about how being gay is science, and I got pushback. Um, and I'm lucky that at Punahou there's support for that. We do have administrators who support our community, but there's always going to be people who disagree, and you have to just be loud. It's scary, and we have to be brave because it's for our kids. And I've gotten in disagreements with other faculty who have pushed back about using pronouns for students because they don't get it. And I basically just threw down the report that, I think it's something astronomical, like 50% of trans students will attempt suicide. And if using a name or using he or she or they saves a child's life, that's the kind of data that I feel like we need to put up there and say, look, this isn't about what you're comfortable or uncomfortable with. This is about saving children's lives. And sometimes that's how dramatic we have to be, because that is the reality. So my 2 cents.
Alison, thank you for sharing. Like, it makes me emotional because that takes a lot of bravery. Like people on this call, some of you might really identify with that, because that is so hard to do. Like, being brave, and I think it's easy for us to say that on this space because, we're here, we've had some experiences, but at the same time, like, being brave is not easy, especially when it comes to those type of issues. Like with administration and like the community, and like being really vocal in a space where they're telling you no. When Lucas, when I read your question, I think initially my first thought is similar to what Alison said. When it comes to allyship and coalition building, we need to find the community around us who are willing to do that in partnership with us and really fight the good fight when it comes to LGBTQ+ issues and inclusivity. One of the things I think about when I think about conservative communities is there are some key words to talk to administration about, like a club and organization, like diversity and like inclusivity. And like, those are the words that you can hone in on. And like when trying to start some type of club or organization, and it might not necessarily be straight up like a GSA. It might start off like just as a overall general social justice inclusivity club, where you can start to bring in these conversations about difference, because let's be real here, it's a complex issue, right? There's a lot of intersectionalities in play, even as we're talking about LGBTQ+ issues. Like, we have to talk about race, we have to talk about the intersections of like gender, like, and then many different facets of gender. Like, there's a lot of it. And so like, I think when you initially start off with a club and you're starting off small, it might be good to just go to the administration and be like, can we start a club that revolves around being an inclusive club when it talks about like the differences between our community? And then hopefully that can permeate through the school too. So I think that is like my answer to that question, in addition to the coalition building and the bravery that it takes in order to really stand up against really, I want to say bad folks, but like they're not all bad, but like, you know what I mean? But those type of folks.
Yes, thank you all for sharing. And that voice is really important. And that visibility, I think, is what folks are bringing up, either as allies or as people from the community. I recall when we presented our data on Kauai, a woman who is a friend and a colleague who's a trans woman, she said, Thaddeus, growing up in Kauai, if I just saw one person at school who I knew was like trans or gender non-conforming, or just I knew that they were there, even if they were, just like sweeping a broom, or even if they were just shelving a book, just seeing that person would have really helped me through my high school years. So that voice and that visibility is so powerful. So thank you all for sharing that. And mentioning, intersectionality, Lord Ryan, I think is really important too. We see data that our trans kids in public schools in Hawaii, half of them are unstably housed. And typically that's because they've been kicked out. So someone asked, for kids who maybe aren't as engaged at school or have trouble accessing school or SGAs or GSAs, what are resources or opportunities for those kids who aren't as involved? And maybe Morgan, I can start with you again.
In my experience, I felt because I think especially in middle school, there weren't many opportunities or organizations that had a supportive community for the LGBTQIA community. But I felt very connected to communities online. And I think that a lot of queer people are now having the experience as they discover their sexuality or their gender identity. There are a lot of people online, content creators over various social media platforms, or even sites like Tumblr, like even Instagram and stuff, where they can find people who are like them and feel less alone. And I think that you have to be careful when you are online, but that a lot of good does come out of the internet, and a lot of people can feel supported, especially young people who are constantly on devices.
Thanks, Morgan. That's a really good point. And anyone else want to add to that?
Yeah, Thaddeus, I think, especially for schools and teachers, what we need to think about, what are the spaces that we create to allow students to just share their identity markers, right? I think most of the time students just enter as students, and we as teachers look at them as students, but everyone is different, and we need to elevate those differences and be okay with it. And I think starting, having students talk about what does it mean to be gay, or what does it mean to be lesbian, or just even saying it, like, my name is Ryan and I'm gay, and then having everyone listen to it is powerful. One thing that we're doing at DreamHouse is we really focus on identity development, and every Friday we have a space, and we call it town hall, where everyone is just coming and sharing their thoughts and opinions about how school is going. And a student just stood up and said, "I'm gay," and sat down. And there was kind of a silence because people didn't know what to, or students didn't know what to do with that information. But I think that's a start, right? You're gathering together as a community, sharing with each other your identity markers, who you are, what does that mean? And then allowing students to process that together. Because if you're not going to create those specific spaces within the school time to even dress, what does it mean to be gay? What does it mean to be Filipino? What does it mean to be low income? All these intersectional identities that show up into the classroom space, you're never going to create an inclusive environment, because people are not going to be exposed or understand differences. And so I think the first step is to just intentionally create those spaces and students to be in them together.
Thank you, Ryan. And this is sparking some great chats. And something that brought up, again, to speak to intersectionality, is that a lot of the students are facing multiple, or not facing, but embrace multiple identities, like you mentioned, being gay, being Filipino. And so if anyone would like to speak to how we can embrace the complexities of identity and create safe spaces where even we, similar to what Morgan was saying, with language and changes and identities shifting so quickly, how can we kind of keep it open for identities that we maybe have forgotten or are unaware of? So if anyone would like to speak to how to kind of keep things open to the shifting identities around not only gender identity and sexual identity, but everything that intersects with that. I gave you a tough one.
That is a tough one.
Mm-hmm.
Oh gosh. The one thing that's like popping up into my head is this idea of vulnerability and like creating the space for vulnerability that Ryan keeps talking about. I think far too often we focus on one identity marker and like that's it, and that's the only identity that needs to come into play. But in reality, like, it's talking story and shared stories that's really important. When Alison, Ryan, and Morgan actually were sharing their parts of their story, like that opens a door, like as an educator, like once you share your story, that opens the door for other folks to share their stories too. And when you're sharing a story, multiple different identity markers will come up without even knowing. And so like acknowledging those different identity markers when you're doing a follow-up response is also really important to start having students think about the intersectional pieces when it comes to the LGBTQ plus identity. I also wanted to like touch on like, I think Randy, you put in a chat from the stream questions from Raven. Raven, thank you for asking that question about resources. There's so many different things that we can put our money into. Like at Campbell, we worked with Evolution. So shout out to Evolution, who I believe it might be on this call listening, but they helped fund buses to go to the Pride Parade last year for Campbell, Eva Mackay, and Alima, and that was huge. And like giving access to those type of transportation, the books that we could be giving to classrooms that acknowledge the many different types of love, like just so much different things that you can actually give to schools physically for donations to like the gay straight alliances that may exist at those schools are very important to make sure that this continues to be an ongoing thing for our students. I tangented real hard, y'all. But if anybody wants to pivot back, I'll give it back to you all.
We'll flow with you, Lord Ryan, no worry. Well, you know, I mean, just to speak to, because it sounds like a lot of people are looking for resources, and I know our conversations are exploring the complexities of identity, but in terms of resources for folks, you know, something that someone suggested in the chat is reaching out to LGBTQ plus groups in colleges and seeing, you know, folks who have recently graduated and seeing maybe how they can support schools. So maybe Morgan and then the educators, if you don't mind speaking to how you collaborate with, you know, organizations outside of your school and what that looks like and how it's meaningful for the students. So Morgan, I'll start with you as always.
I think that our club hasn't really worked in like very recently, hasn't branched out yet with other organizations. I know that one thing that we did was we invited students from other GSAs from, I believe it was Iolani, and they came and they spoke about their experiences. And I thought it was really helpful to have different opinions from even a different school to come and speak to us, because there are such different perspectives and experiences between different people, and they were able to share some of the things that they do in their club that we could use to help support and educate our students that are in SAGA.
That's great. Love to hear about the collaboration and the learning from each other. And then Ryan, Alison. Oh, Ryan, go ahead.
Yeah, I think when I went to the University of Hawaii, there's so many different organizations that know all this information, but for some reason, it's just not going into our public school systems. And I think one thing that I'd like to ask is for these organizations to start talking to our policymakers and ensuring that, you know, these things need to be in a child's classroom, and these are the necessary steps that's going to get there. Just sharing from my particular experience, when I wanted to teach a sexual health curriculum, it needed to be approved by the district. And in the Leeward district, they did have a curriculum that was pushed out by Kapiolani Hospital. And so if we have these local organizations who are talking to our system curriculum people within the Department of Education and saying this is an approved curriculum that we know is going to benefit communities, I think that's where it starts. Because right now you see a lot of educators trying to find where these information is, and it exists. We have a medical school, we have the University of Hawaii, we have the Department of Health, who is well knowledgeable about all these things. And so I would say, as an educator, as a school leader, my ask is for these organizations is to start putting pressure on our policy members as well as the Board of Education, who can make the reality happen for kids.
Yeah, that's a really good point, Ryan. And I maybe the follow-up question, and if you can answer this or one of the other panelists, you know, how would a teacher or an educator or an ally go about doing that? Because I know, Lord Ryan, you mentioned earlier, you know, some teachers there's a risk of losing the job as well, right? So what are the opportunities for folks to engage in that policy push?
I'm super interested in policy, and it starts, well, in terms of how do we ensure system-wide changes in policy, it's really the Board of Education. And so really looking at times to go to the Board of Education, provide some testimony and feedback about curriculum changes, because any decision that they make or changes to policy, the Department of Education needs to implement. And so I think we haven't been really looking at what can we do to engage the Board of Education in these critical conversations, and it's time to have them think about policies, and then the Department of Education can figure out how to implement those policies that are created.
I wanted to jump in and sort of respond to that, because my question is actually, I have a question too, is how can those of us at private schools support public schools? We're lucky, we have an administration that supports us. So what can we do to support the public schools? And then I also was reading that Shai's question. It was a question about if a school doesn't have a GSA or a SAGA, what can they do? Contact us. Morgan pointed it out. We had a great experience talking with the GSA students from Iolani. We need to reach out more. Put your info in the chat. Get in touch with me. I love the idea of how public and private schools can come together and support each other and learn from each other and let the kids really create something as well.
Thanks, Alison. That's so wonderful. And thank you for welcoming other students. I just wanted to clarify. So in the chat, Kim Coco was saying that curriculum decisions are made at the district or school level. So I think it sounds like that's another, or that's where folks can focus some of their efforts around policy changes as well. So thank you, Kim. Well, just to kind of, in the spirit of speaking about resources and kind of connecting, you know, as we talk about these resources, what is your main resource that you go to, either as a student or as an educator, that you would recommend for other people who are just interested in just starting to either push at the policy level or push at the program level or push at just the individual family level? So Morgan, what is one great resource that you find for students?
Honestly, as someone who is a teenager and doesn't necessarily talk to organizations, I find that a lot of my personal education on a lot of LGBTQIA plus issues came directly from the internet, because that is where I spend about 80% of my time, honestly. And there are a lot of great content creators that they will share their personal experiences, and those experiences can help inform and educate, I think, people, because I didn't know anything pretty much in 7th grade. But then by the time I came into high school, I felt secure in my knowledge due to all of the great people I had seen online talking about how they came out to their families, or like different terminology for the LGBTQ community and labels and everything like that.
Thanks, Morgan. So yay, internet, everyone. Please continue. And then Lord Ryan, Alison, or Ryan, do you have any resources that you would really like to point out as something helpful for you folks?
I think for me and for many other educators, the resources and the best professional development that we get is from other educators. So I would say like Lord Ryan's GSA was really powerful. A lot of GSAs are very powerful. We have Ilima Intermediate, their GSA called, I forget what they were called, but they actually won GLSEN Club of the Year. And so GLSEN Hawaii has a really powerful network of resources that they push out to schools. And just like I mentioned earlier, Lord Ryan and I are part of PRISM. And it was just a bunch of educators coming together who said, what do we need to do at this moment to address these issues that both teachers and students are facing? So I would encourage many different educators out there in Hawaii to figure out how you can build coalitions with each other and then connect with organizations and outside organizations and other schools to have these conversations starting within the classroom, but also on a system-wide level. And one thing that we're trying to do at PRISM is trying to look at different aspects. How do we address policy-related issues? How do we address things related into the classroom? How do we address in the community? So really mobilizing and bringing people together to think about where can we influence, control, and power to make these changes.
Great, I love that. I love the consolidation of power and the mobilization of people in the community. So thank you, Ryan. Alison or Lord Ryan, do you have any resources or a go-to thing that you find very useful for your work?
I think Ryan stole my answer. I was just gonna say, like, other educators are so important in this conversation. Like, I'm thinking about the idea of mobilizing, and I think that's really important. Like, part of me really wants to just like gather all the people who are listening to this who have like GSAs, and like that be the bridge between right now private school and public school and charter school and all the different types of schools who have these type of organizations or who want to start, and then we engaging in that conversation of how, and that could also be our group to lobby our folks up in our legislature to make policies that like help in this. I think one of the things I lean on, and something that I think we haven't really touched on as much, I think just through the conversation, is just understanding gender variance. And like also like I always reference, and then Brian and I actually just had a conversation about this, but different diagrams like the gender unicorn, like just those different type of things that help our students understand more about sexual orientation, gender identity, gender expression, and like really teaching our folks like the many different pieces of human sexuality. So like really, I mean, do a Google search. There are so many different resources out there that help educate our youth on the different key pieces of the LGBTQ+ community.
Thanks, Lord Ryan. And I think that ties back to what Morgan was saying too, is like providing people the language to even express who they are is really powerful and very important. So thank you for bringing that up. I think that's really helpful. Alison, is there a resource that you would like to share?
The one that I probably, I mean, obviously what they've said already is the truth. It's the other teachers, but I'm also a huge fan of Glisten, just for basic safe space, how to talk to kids, how to talk to your children. Sorry, my dog is barking in the background. But I think that Glisten does a really good job of just giving a basic, this is something to help you connect.
Thanks, Alison. And I know folks are in the chat sharing a lot more great resources and sharing their own email addresses. So I think an additional resource, at least for this call, is the 52 other people who are on this call with you. So please feel free to reach out to folks to share your information, because I think that community mobilization that Ryan mentioned is extremely powerful. And it's important to acknowledge that, or to really remember that we don't have to give up our power willingly, that we are a community that has resilience and that has strength, and that we can draw upon that with other folks in our community and with our allies. Also mentioned that Kim pointed out that DOE teachers are protected from discrimination. So it doesn't remove any of the, it is still scary to speak out, but just to know that there are protections in place too that we can leverage. So again, just really acknowledging the protections and the powers that we have. But with that in mind, I want to speak a little bit before we end today about resiliency, because sometimes when we talk about stuff, we really sometimes highlight the deficits or the disparities of our communities, but also sometimes we don't remember the power and the resiliency of our communities. So I want to provide space for folks to talk about great things that have worked and successes that highlight how beautiful and diverse and powerful our community still is and continues to be. So Morgan, if you don't, would you like to share something that really worked or that demonstrated this wonderful resiliency?
I know that at Punahou, we have a gender studies class, and I felt that really not only brought people together, but it was really good education for a lot of students. And I thought that having that class was a really big step in the right direction for our school, because I had little to no knowledge about the concept of intersectionality before I took that class. It was really good, and it facilitated many great discussions, and I got to see the differences between so many different people and their opinions and their personal experiences, and how that filtered through this lens of like looking into differences and things that people have to deal with, and things that like people do in order to uplift communities of certain races and sexualities, etc. And it was really cool.
Awesome. That's so glad to hear that it's so inspiring and moving. So thank you, Morgan.
Alison?
Alison?
Sorry, I'm so sorry. I have to add a little bit to that, because the person who teaches that class is also a coach. And so a lot of like stereotypical tough football boys wound up taking the class because of the coach, only to realize that they were in a class where they would be talking about toxic masculinity and about the LGBTQIA plus community. And all of a sudden you have all of these big football boys who are like, okay, this is a different perspective. So it was a pretty amazing experience to learn about. So I just had to throw that in there. So I think that's part of the more that we can interact with everyone in the community and bring people in, the better. It's
Thanks, Alison.
To discriminate against people who you sit next to in the classroom and actually learn their story.
That's beautiful. And it really a testament to allyship there too. So thank you for bringing that up. And, when we speak with our community members too, a lot of folks always speak about family members that they know. So it's like my niece or my daughter-in-law, and that really does make a difference. So knowing someone and just being present in their lives is really powerful. So Ryan or Lord Ryan, I already see mobilization happening in the chat, but do you want to speak more to resiliency or power?
Yeah, I think one, for all our rainbow teachers out there, we're so resilient. It never ends. Like, we're always constantly thinking or, double thinking about, is this an opportunity for me to be brave or show my identity, especially when it comes to working with students or talking to family members. And personally, it's very liberating when I can just walk around and say, I'm gay and I'm a school leader. And my kids are like, yeah, Coach Ryan, like they call me Coach at DreamHouse, but they're like, yeah, Coach Ryan's gay. And they all start clapping. So I think like, keep up the great work in the representation, because your representation, just like a GSA, saves lives. And the greatest feeling that you can get is when students write you notes at the end of the day that just says, thank you for being gay, because now I see myself. I see myself in a school leadership position as a principal, right? Like, your principal is gay, or your vice principal is gay. And there's so much resilience in those stories. And I hope that with those who are listening today, we can mobilize and think about, what does it mean to just feel comfortable in your school space of who you are, and then take it a step further and really going down to the Board of Education as well as the state legislator to make these changes. So good job to all the rainbow teachers out there, and keep up the great work, and let's continue this movement.
Wow, super inspiring, Ryan. I actually teared up a little bit. That was really great. Lord Ryan?
I mean, I think the only thing I'd add is like, there are students who are also on this call, like y'all are more than resilient. And like, I think we're talking from the educator perspective. Like, I have seen my kids at Campbell High School, part of Rainbow Sabres, do some amazing things, and like have conversations with other administration, other students that I would not have been able to do when I was in high school in 2010. Like, it's amazing to see what like our students can do and how they can just share their experience so vulnerably and also be so brave. And so like, your resilience is applauded here too. Like, Morgan, you are doing amazing. Like, we are giving you like, you are the first person to answer, and you are like, yes, that's all I have to say. But like, it's amazing to see how our kids have been just are growing into really strong advocates for social justice, who are sharing their stories and willing to teach folks who have probably not even had these conversations before. And so like your resilience in this moment and your bravery is also valued. And so I think to our educators, lean on your kids. I think we say like lean on one another, other educators, like lean on your kids to help you too, because one of the things that really got me through the day was seeing like my kids make like presentations for teachers about safe space training that Ryan talked about earlier. That was so impactful. And like that gave me a sense of pride to know that our young generation is here and they're ready to take on that role as well.
Well, I love that. And I think one of your former students is in the chat too, Lord Ryan, it looks like. So, so glad that connection lasts beyond just the school, right? I mean, what students experience in the school extends way beyond. So thanks everyone for sharing. And with that in mind, you know, as we talk about youth and youth voice, I want to ask a question about how do we promote youth voice? You know, we can have these conversations, but what are ways to really center youth voices? For example, maybe having a panel with all youth, you know, so just future opportunities. So Morgan, first one up, as always, but thank you so much. So how can we better center youth voices?
I think that just giving them the opportunity to speak to adults, educators, and the administration is a great opportunity, because I've noticed that a lot of people have a lot of ideas or things that they've noticed that maybe other people who are watching, like 20 to 30 students, wouldn't notice. There are small interactions that they point out and they keep in their heads. And we actually recently had a whole discussion about a specific class at Punahou and how we would want to improve it, because that class goes over a lot of LGBTQIA topics and maybe didn't handle it in the best way that it could. So we, by giving students a platform, they filled up an entire document with like recommendations that they would make. And we had discussions with teachers about how to better support students in class. So honestly, I think that just giving them the opportunity to speak to adults opens up like a whole other line of communication.
That's great, Morgan, especially as we talk about curriculum a lot during this chat, and having the youth voice, being able to get feedback on that, I think is so vital. So thanks for bringing that up. Do any of the other panelists want to speak about how to bring up youth voice? Or
I always asked, well, like I asked my students like what they wanted to share. Like when we were developing professional development for teachers, when it came to like safe space training, we had the first initial conversation of what are some important things that you think teachers need to know. And that's where the conversation started. And what we found were like, they wanted to talk about sexual violence in the LGBTQ plus community. They wanted to talk about pronouns in the LGBTQ plus community. So these are the foundational things that our kids want and need, but we have to ask. I think sometimes we make the assumption like we know exactly what teachers need to know, but in reality, we might, like as I was saying earlier with Morgan talking about TikTok, like we might not know. And so like asking that question right away is like the big, what I would say would be the first thing to do.
thank you, Lord Ryan. Yeah, I think curiosity, genuine curiosity, I think is a really important characteristic. So thank you. Alison or Ryan?
I definitely support the student-centered approach. What we're doing here at DreamHouse is just that, you know, if students have issues that they want to bring up, that they do it, but it's up to the teachers to create that intentional space and time, whether it's, you know, an hour on a Friday to just say, hey, let's have a conversation on what you want to do, to provide that space. It's about school design. It's about opportunities for students to engage in that dialogue and to make it part of the culture, right? Like, what are we doing as a school to allow kids to share what they need to in a very authentic way without feeling any sort of judgment or saying that we won't be able to do those things, right? It should always be yes and not no, because our students are super powerful. And as someone who is super active in student government since 6th grade in Kalihi schools, I know that students have a lot to say about their education, and a lot to say about how they view school settings. And so, you know, even teaching our students about the advocacy and civic engagement process is important, because legislators and the Board of Education want to hear from our students as well.
And I think to keep asking, that we have to keep going back, just like we've brought up with the TikTok, is next week it might be Snapchat, you know, the week after that, who knows what it's going to be, that we have to keep engaging in the conversation, and asking once or twice or not is not enough. It's got to be a continual dialogue where we continue to learn from our students as the world we live in evolves and changes.
Thank you all. Those are great insights. I mean, being curious, creating intentional spaces for new champions, getting involved in student government at 6th grade is very important. And also, you know, creating mechanisms for feedback. So really powerful. And I think these conversations and learning can extend, someone mentioned in the chat, you know, just looking to people who are seniors as well and seeing what they've gone through. So continuing to share stories and to continue our dialogue, trialogues, quadrilogues, and any other number. I'm not a mathematician. But in our last 14 minutes together, I'm going to ask just a closing question for you all, and then we'll open it up for Q&A for anyone else whose question wasn't addressed already. So the final question is, you know, what is one thing that someone watching this can do this week? So one actionable thing. And Morgan, I'm going to start with you. I know it's not a surprise by now, but I just wanted to warn you. So Morgan, what is one thing that someone could do this week?
I think that finding resources and educating yourself on experiences and perspectives from members of the LGBTQIA community, whether that's talking to someone you know who might be queer or going online and finding queer experiences, I think that's really helpful in building empathy for those communities and really understanding how to better support them, especially in school.
Great, thank you, Morgan. Excellent. Ryan, how would you answer that question?
Thank you, Thaddeus. As a school leader, I know that the relationships with parents are super important. So if there are parents on this call, I suggest you call or email your principals and just ask a simple question. How are you introducing these topics in the classroom? Because that's going to spark conversation. And it's just a simple email, simple question, and have, you know, I think it forces the school to have that conversation. So you could do that tonight, and then hopefully you get a response by tomorrow.
Thank you, Ryan. Love the advocacy. Alison?
That is such a big, there's just so much. I think coming at it from being an English teacher, for me, I'm thinking, ooh, what more can I do? So I'm always thinking of what can I do to normalize again. Like, this is just part of the people in our community. So it might be pick a poem that's written by someone from the community to share in class. Change your word problems in math tomorrow. You know, read a story to a group of kids where the child has two dads. So do something little that completely normalizes being part of the community.
Awesome. Thank you. That's great, Alison. And Lord Ryan?
To leapfrog off that, I actually encourage folks who are teachers, administration on this call, actually anybody who's on this call, a physical environment is really important. So like go out and buy something that represents the LGBTQ plus community and put it up. Like, I think that's so simple. And like it showed, like I have a pride flag in my office right now that I put up just so that like people know that I am an inclusive space if they want to talk about those type of things. Like those are so simple. Like Target, $1. It's only $1. Go and grab it. They have a whole section. Like and so like there's things that you can do that's very simple in that way that really open that door. Like you don't need something to say safe space for it to be a safe space. So just a book or a little, stickers on the door. Those are some very simple things that you can do to already start the conversation.
Thank you, Lord Ryan. And I just want to give a caveat, Lord Ryan does not work for Target, so you can buy from anywhere. And I'll answer the question, even though I'm the moderator, and I think an important one is just to vote. So as we're in voting season, if you are able to vote, please vote, because at the local level as well, these impact the policies that Ryan was mentioning. So please do that. And so we will open it now in the last 9 minutes for questions. So if we missed your questions, I'm so sorry, please put it in the chat again so we can see it. And I'll just kind of try to take them as they come up. So, and again, thanks everyone for all the great resources in the chat. I also want to acknowledge that someone shared that Alison told us that her classroom is a rainbow glitter explosion. So everyone please meet at Alison's classroom after this, but one at a time, safely with masks on, please. Okay, I don't see any questions. So is there any other thoughts that folks wanted to share? Great, well, there's a lot of emails and resources going on in the chat. With just a few more minutes to go, please just continue to reach out to folks. Just know that there's a community of folks who are eager to support, whether as allies or community members. And I'm just going to start wrapping it up. So we'll just end with just one sentiment that you want folks to take away with in terms of, how to kind of keep going. So what would be your words of encouragement, whether for students or for staff or for educators or for family members, to kind of stay resilient and just to keep going? And my favorite first person to answer, Morgan, I'll start with you. So what are your words for encouragement for our folks on the line?
I guess I would say, as a student, I know like things can get really rough, especially if at home maybe people aren't as supportive as they should be, but know that in the future, like there are so many opportunities to meet people that will be there for you and will support you and love you, and like just having that connection it's a really good thing to not only look out for, but look forward to, because I believe that it will happen, that you will find a group of people or even just one person who will be there for you, even if you don't feel supported at the moment.
Whoa, that was total chicken skin. Thank you, Morgan. That was beautiful. Would anyone like to follow Morgan? That was like amazing. I'll have to call you by name, I guess. Lord Ryan, what are your final words of encouragement for folks on the line?
Lord Ryan, he called you, but I can go.
Oh, sorry.
I missed it. I heard Ryan. See, that's the problem with having someone who has a similar name to you on the panel.
I know, and I have a sultry voice, so I apologize for that. But Ryan, please go ahead.
My words would just be, let's mobilize. I think with the work that PRISM is doing, with the work that many different teachers are doing in different complex areas, let's come together, let's have one big hui, and it's an opportunity for us to start advocating on a policy level. And I'm down to help facilitate that. I'm down to also work with unions to do that, and a bunch of different community organizers out there who are willing to help us.
Awesome. Let's mobilize everyone. I think that's great. Let's find new champions. Lord Ryan.
I mean, I couldn't have said it better myself. I think one of the things I'm really enjoying right now are people in the chat adding their emails and to like just share. I'm hoping that after this, our folks who are in charge of this panel like connects us all together, because I think that's an important conversation to have. I think the people on this call are ready to mobilize in those conversations together, and like build out what hopefully they already have a GSA. But if they don't, how do we support them in getting there? And like making that bridge with this conversation today.
Excellent. Thank you, Lord Ryan. And Alison.
Okay. taking Morgan's sentiment and just adding to it, you're not alone, quite simply. You're not. We're all here, and we're championing you, and we support you. We are you.
That's beautiful. Thank you. And can we give a virtual round of applause for all of our panelists today? I just want to thank everyone for their time, for their insight, and for willing to be vulnerable in this hour and a half. And I guess as my last words of encouragement is just to remind everyone that we have power and that we don't have to give it up willingly, and that we are strong and that we are resilient because we're here doing what we do. So with that, I'm going to end this session. I think, Randy, we have a few more minutes. So I guess if folks want to continue to chat or share resources in the chat, please feel free. And then I'll turn it back over to Randy for putting together this great panel to close it out for the day. So thank you, Randy, so much.
Perfect. Thank you, Thaddeus, so much. Can we all give them a round of applause? I want to just say that this has been such an informative hour and a half. I know that everyone on Facebook and on Zoom have been saying, they've just been raving about this. So let's just continue this conversation. I'm glad that everyone's connecting in the chat and that we're able to mobilize this conversation and make it a reality. Coming up, I do want to just make sure that everyone's aware of the opportunities that are going to be happening for future panels. Our next one is this Thursday, October 22nd. The topic for this Thursday is how have gay-owned businesses shifted due to COVID-19. We have an amazing lineup for this one as well. We have Ari South, who is an amazing designer. Most of you guys know her from Project Runway. We have Ryan Hugh, who is a local attorney. And we also have Will Chen, who owns an amazing catering company. So if all of you guys are able and free on Thursday, please join us at 4:30. And that's it. I think we can continue to have chat in the box. Let's just wrap it up in about 30 seconds. And thank you to all the panelists. You guys have been amazing. Bye, guys.